The night was cold, but the air inside the Cole mansion was colder. Marble floors echoed with hurried footsteps, as if the house itself wanted to erase the sound of what was about to happen. Elena Torres stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, a small suitcase by her side, her hands trembling around the handle. She couldn't believe it. Just 24 hours ago, she had been Adrian Cole's wife, the woman who had stood beside him through endless nights of building his empire. Now, she was nothing more than an intruder being thrown out of her own home. Adrian stood a few steps above her, towering in his sharp navy suit. His voice was smooth, too calm for the cruelty it carried. "Elena, I'm giving you exactly 1 day to clear out. 24 hours. You don't belong here anymore." The words hit harder than a slap. Elena's heart pounded as she searched his eyes for the man she once knew, the man she had married with trembling hands and hopeful vows, but all she saw was arrogance, a smug satisfaction that twisted his handsome face into something monstrous. "What do you mean? I'm your wife," Elena whispered, her voice cracking. Her chest tightened, and for a second she thought she might collapse. "Wife?" Adrian chuckled bitterly, stepping closer. "You were convenient, that's all. But the board, the investors, the world, they don't need to see me with a timid, ordinary girl at my side. They deserve someone who matches my power, my ambition." Before Elena could respond, a familiar perfume filled the hallway. She froze. No, it couldn't be. Out of the shadows emerged Sabrina Miller, her best friend since college. The woman who had held Elena's hand during her wedding, who had whispered secrets and promises of sisterhood late into the night. Now Sabrina walked toward Adrian like she already owned the place, her designer heels clicking against the marble, her lips curved in a victorious smile. "Elena," Sabrina said softly, pretending at pity. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll find your way. Adrian and I, we belong together." Elena's knees buckled. The betrayal sliced through her like glass. She wanted to scream, to rip that smile off Sabrina's face, but the shock left her numb. She could only stare, her chest heaving, as the reality crashed in. Her husband and her best friend together. Adrian placed a hand on Sabrina's waist, pulling her close as if to drive the knife deeper. "See, Elena? Sabrina understands me. She has the vision you never did, and she knows how to stand beside a man like me. Now leave. You've got 24 hours. Security will help if you can't find the door." Tears blurred Elena's vision. Her fingers tightened on the handle of her suitcase. The house she had decorated with her own hands, the marriage she had poured her soul into, the friendship she had trusted more than anything. It all crumbled in a single moment. Outside, rain pounded against the tall windows, as if the world itself was mourning her downfall. She turned slowly, her body heavy, her spirit crushed. Step by step, she dragged her suitcase across the floor, past the servants who dared not meet her eyes. Cameras flashed outside the iron gates. Paparazzi had somehow caught wind of the scandal. Their voices shouted through the storm. "Mrs. Cole, why are you leaving with a suitcase? Did the CEO replace you with Sabrina Miller? Is it true you only had 24 hours to leave?" Each question stabbed deeper. Elena lifted her hand to shield her face, but the photographers didn't stop. Their lenses captured every tear, every tremor, every crack in her once dignified composure. By tomorrow morning, her humiliation would be splashed across every business tabloid in New York. The limousine that once carried her with pride now drove past without stopping. She was invisible, no longer the wife of Adrian Cole, but a discarded woman with no title, no wealth, and nowhere to go. At the gates, she paused, rain soaking her hair, her coat clinging to her body. Behind her, through the golden glow of the mansion's windows, she saw them. Adrian pouring champagne into 2 glasses, Sabrina sinking into the leather sofa she herself had chosen years ago. Their laughter floated faintly through the glass. The sound nearly broke her. But beneath the pain something stirred. A flicker. A fragile ember buried under grief. She didn't know it yet. But that night would not be the end of her story. It was only the beginning. 5 years later, the same cameras that mocked her would gather again. But this time the world would hear her name in a very different light. The court would shatter the empire Adrian thought he had secured. And Elena Torres, the woman he threw away in the rain, would rise higher than he ever imagined. And on that stormy night, as Elena vanished into the shadows, no one, Not Adrian, not Sabrina, not the media, had any idea what destiny was preparing for her. Elena Torres was not born into power, nor did she grow up imagining that one day her life would be entangled with billions of dollars, ruthless CEOs, and the glare of paparazzi cameras. She came from a small, sun-faded town in New Mexico, where dusty roads stretched for miles and neighbors knew each other's names. Her mother, Rosa, worked 2 jobs, one at a local diner, another cleaning offices after hours. Her father had disappeared when Elena was only 8, leaving behind a few broken promises and a trail of unpaid bills. Elena learned early what it meant to fight for survival. While other girls her age played with dolls, she balanced a tray of dishes at the diner, helping her mother whenever the place got too busy. School books were her escape, and she devoured them like oxygen. Teachers often said she was destined for more, that the sharp spark in her brown eyes was not meant to dim in a forgotten corner of the desert. By the time she graduated high school, Elena had earned a scholarship to a business program in New York. It felt like stepping into another universe. The skyscrapers, the crowds, the relentless pace, everything screamed that she didn't belong. But she refused to let fear win. She worked part-time at a coffee shop, took night classes, and sometimes skipped meals just to afford subway fare. It was during these years that she met Sabrina Miller. Sabrina was her roommate in a cramped dorm room their freshman year. Blonde, charming, and endlessly ambitious, Sabrina was the kind of girl who could talk her way into exclusive parties or convince professors to extend deadlines. At first, Elena admired her confidence. Sabrina had a way of making life look effortless, while Elena still carried the weight of every dollar spent, every risk taken. Despite their differences, the two became inseparable. Sabrina pushed Elena to loosen up, to wear makeup, to believe that she deserved more than just surviving. Elena, in turn, helped Sabrina study, edited her papers, and stood by her through breakups and failures. Their bond felt unshakable, the kind of friendship Elena thought would last forever. After college, while Sabrina drifted between jobs and high society circles, Elena landed a position as an executive assistant at a rising investment firm. She was efficient, detail-oriented, and willing to put in endless hours. That's where she first met Adrian Cole. Adrian wasn't yet the titan he would become. He was ambitious, hungry, and brilliant in a way that drew people in like moths to a flame. At 30, he was already making headlines for his bold acquisitions and unrelenting drive. But with Elena, he was different, or so she believed. He noticed her long before she ever considered herself noticeable. In the office full of sleek suits and practiced smiles, Adrian paid attention to the young woman who worked quietly in the background, who anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. One evening, after a 12-hour day, he stopped by her desk. "You're wasted behind a keyboard," he said, his voice smooth, his gaze intense. "You have instincts most executives would kill for." Elena flushed, embarrassed by the compliment. But it was the first time someone had acknowledged her potential in such a way. What followed was a whirlwind. Adrian took her to dinners under the pretense of discussing work, then to art galleries, then to weekend getaways in the Hamptons. For the first time, Elena felt like she wasn't the girl from the desert anymore. She was someone worthy of being chosen. When he proposed, it felt unreal. Adrian Cole, already hailed as one of the youngest CEOs in the city, wanted her, Elena, the girl who had once scrubbed floors with her mother. Their wedding was elegant yet intimate, attended by business elites and whispered about in society pages. Elena believed she was walking into a fairy tale. In those first years, she worked tirelessly to support him. She arranged his meetings, polished his speeches, and built a home that reflected both warmth and ambition. She told herself that Sabrina, who resurfaced often at their parties, was just a friend visiting, not a threat. She ignored the glances, the too long conversations, the laughter that sounded like secrets. But deep down, cracks had begun forming. Adrian's ambition was no longer just about success. It was about power, image, dominance. He needed a partner who could shine under the spotlight as much as he did. Elena's quiet strength, once what he admired, became a liability in his eyes. She gave him everything: her loyalty, her labor, her love. And yet, in return, she received silence, criticism, and eventually betrayal. Her world began shrinking. She stopped calling her mother as often, ashamed of the distance between who she once was and who she was becoming. She drifted away from old friends who couldn't understand the pressure of being married to a man like Adrian. The only person she confided in was Sabrina. And that, Alina would later realize, was her greatest mistake. Because while Alina poured her heart into her marriage, Sabrina was positioning herself to steal it all. She whispered to Adrian that Alina was too plain, too meek, too small-minded for the empire he was building. She inserted herself into business meetings, always dressed to perfection, always ready with a cunning remark. And Adrian listened. Still, Alina clung to hope. She told herself every couple struggled. She believed that one day Adrian would look at her the way he had when he first stopped by her desk, that he would remember the woman who believed in him before the world did. But that night, when he gave her 24 hours to leave, she finally saw the truth. To Adrian, she was no longer a partner. To Sabrina, she was an obstacle. To the world, she was about to become a scandal. Yet beneath the heartbreak, a silent promise began to form inside her. She would not always be the woman dragged into the rain with a suitcase. She would not always be the name whispered with pity. The girl from the desert still lived within her. And she had not yet played her final card. Because 5 years later, Elena Torres would walk into the courtroom not as the discarded wife of a CEO, but as the woman destined to inherit $5 billion. New York City glitters at night in a way no other place can. From the glass towers of Midtown to the brownstone-lined streets of the Upper East Side, every corner seems soaked in ambition. For Adrian Cole, this city was not just home, it was his stage. Every deal he struck, every gala he attended, every camera that flashed in his direction was part of a carefully constructed image, the unstoppable CEO who had conquered Wall Street before 40. This world was intoxicating, but it was also ruthless. It thrived on perception. A single photograph could make or break a reputation. A whispered rumor at a charity dinner could send stock prices soaring or tumbling. To survive, you had to play the game with flawless precision. And no one played it better than Adrian Cole. The Cole Mansion, perched just outside the city, was a fortress of marble and glass. Behind its gates, parties unfolded that resembled coronations. Politicians brushed shoulders with actors, investors toasted with socialites, and every handshake was a transaction. Elena used to move quietly through these gatherings, making sure every detail was perfect. Flowers arranged, champagne chilled, conversations steered away from controversy. She believed her role was to support Adrian, to anchor him in humility. But in truth, she had been nothing more than a backdrop. The real stars of these events were men like Adrian, towering, confident, their tuxedos tailored to perfection, and women like Sabrina, draped in designer gowns, their laughter sharp enough to cut glass, their beauty wielded like a weapon. The elite thrived on spectacle, and Elena, with her modest dresses and quiet grace, had become invisible in a world that demanded shine. One of the defining moments of this glittering stage was the Metropolitan Charity Gala held every spring at the museum's Grand Hall. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above the guests, their light bouncing off diamonds worth more than most people's homes. Cameras flashed non-stop as limousines lined the streets. To be invited was an honor. To be seen there was a declaration of power. Adrian lived for that night. Each year, he strode through the crowd as if he owned the city itself. He loved the flash of cameras, the whispers of admiration, the way investors leaned in to catch every word he said. It was the arena where he secured alliances, showcased Sabrina on his arm, and let the world believe his empire was unshakable. Elena remembered her last gala vividly. She had worn a pale blue gown, simple but elegant, one she had chosen herself rather than from the racks Sabrina recommended. She remembered standing beside Adrian as he introduced her to senators and CEOs, her smile practiced, her posture perfect. And yet when she glanced at him, his eyes were already wandering to Sabrina, laughing across the room in a crimson dress. The humiliation of that night had been subtle but devastating. Every time Adrian's gaze lingered too long on Sabrina, every time the cameras seemed to frame them instead of her, Elena felt herself shrinking. By the end of the evening, she stood in the corner, clutching her glass of champagne like a lifeline, wondering if anyone even noticed she was still there. That was the cruel truth of the backdrop she inhabited. The world of billionaires was not built for women like her, women who believed love and loyalty were enough. It was built for those who could wield power as effortlessly as breathing. Adrian's empire reflected this truth. His company, Cole Global, was a towering monolith in finance and technology. Its logo, two interlocked silver rings, shone on skyscrapers and conference halls across the world. Inside, the culture mirrored Adrian himself. Aggressive, ambitious, and merciless. Employees worked 12-hour days, clawing their way up the ladder, terrified of falling out of favor. Alina had walked those halls countless times, delivering files, attending board dinners, trying to be part of her husband's vision. But even there, she was treated as an accessory. When she entered a meeting, men would nod politely, women would offer tight smiles, and then conversations would flow right past her as if she were invisible. In that world, Sabrina thrived. She had the confidence, the cunning, the willingness to flatter and manipulate. Where Elena brought quiet competence, Sabrina brought spectacle. And in Adrian's universe, spectacle always won. The backdrop wasn't just glamorous, it was merciless. Every gala, every corporate summit, every dinner at five-star restaurants carried the same underlying message. You are either ascending or you are irrelevant. Adrian understood this, Sabrina understood it. Elena for too long did not. But the tides of the city were shifting. Behind the polished doors and glittering chandeliers, whispers had begun. Investors questioned Adrian's obsession with image. Employees noticed the cracks in his leadership. The press had begun sniffing around his relationship with Sabrina, hinting at impropriety, betrayal, scandal. And somewhere far from the flashbulbs, Elena was quietly rebuilding herself. While Adrian tightened his grip on appearances, she was preparing for something greater than he could ever imagine. The backdrop of power and prestige, the very stage Adrian thought he ruled, was about to turn against him. And when it did, the same cameras that once ignored Elena would fight for a single glimpse of her. Because the next time Elena walked into that glittering world, she would not be invisible. She would be the woman holding $5 billion in her name. Adrian Cole had always been ambitious, but ambition alone doesn't make a villain. What makes a man dangerous is the point where ambition mutates into obsession, where charm hardens into cruelty, and where love becomes nothing more than a business transaction. That was Adrian Cole. He came from a middle-class family in Boston. His father was an accountant, his mother a schoolteacher. Nothing about his childhood suggested greatness, and perhaps that was the very fuel that drove him. Adrian was determined to never feel small, to never be overlooked, to never walk into a room without owning it. He studied finance at Harvard, clawed his way into investment banking, and by 35, he had built Cole Global, a financial technology empire worth billions. To the outside world, he was a hero of modern capitalism. Magazine covers praised him as the visionary CEO. Talk shows invited him to discuss leadership. His quotes about risk and reward were framed on office walls. But those who worked under him knew the truth. Adrian was not just driven, he was ruthless. He demanded 12-hour days, berated executives in front of their peers, and used fear as his favorite weapon. "You're either climbing or you're falling," he often said. "There's no standing still in my company." Behind the closed doors of the boardroom, he didn't just want results, he wanted devotion. And that same philosophy carried into his marriage. When Adrian first met Elena, he thought he had found someone who grounded him, someone who admired his brilliance without competing with it. In the early days, he genuinely believed she was the balance he needed. But as his empire grew, his need for admiration changed. He no longer wanted a partner. He wanted a mirror. Someone who reflected back the power and dominance he craved. Elena's quiet loyalty, once endearing, began to bore him. She wasn't flashy enough at galas. She didn't command headlines. She didn't have the ruthless sparkle he wanted at his side when the cameras turned. That's when Sabrina slid into place. Sabrina knew exactly how to play the game. She flattered him relentlessly, told him he was destined to reshape the world, and laughed at every cutting remark he made about competitors. She wore dresses that made reporters look twice, heels that clicked like exclamation points, and she had the nerve to challenge him in front of others, always in ways that made him look stronger. Adrian liked the way Sabrina made him feel. Invincible, admired, untouchable. But Adrian wasn't just seduced by Sabrina's charm. He was seduced by what she represented. In his mind, Elena was the past, a reminder of the years he spent clawing his way up from nothing. Sabrina was the future, sleek, ambitious, unafraid of the spotlight. Choosing Sabrina wasn't just about love, it was about image. And Adrian would sacrifice anything for image. By the time Adrian gave Elena 24 hours to leave their home, he had already rewritten their history in his mind. He convinced himself she had never truly understood him, that she had been holding him back. He spun the narrative as though he were doing her a favor, freeing her from a world she couldn't handle. And once Elena was gone, he wasted no time making Sabrina the new centerpiece of his empire. She appeared on his arm at galas, sat beside him at board meetings, and was photographed in glossy magazines as the woman behind the man. Together, they looked like the perfect power couple, young, dazzling, ruthless. But what Adrian didn't realize was that in choosing Sabrina, he had exposed his greatest weakness. He believed loyalty was useless, that loyalty could be bought and discarded. What he didn't understand was that true power comes not from fear or image, but from trust. And Adrian had destroyed the only person who had ever given him that without condition. The darker side of Adrian wasn't just his betrayal, it was his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable, that the world would always bend to his will. He laughed at whispers of scandal, brushed off reporters' questions, and even mocked Elena in private, calling her a ghost in the rain. At parties, he boasted to investors about how quickly he had moved on, how he had traded up. He never once imagined that the woman he discarded could return, not as a scorned ex-wife, but as a force that would unravel everything he had built. In private moments, Adrian revealed the full extent of his cruelty. He told Sabrina stories about Elena, twisting them into jokes for her amusement. He rewrote Elena's sacrifices as failures, her quiet devotion as weakness. And Sabrina, hungry to solidify her place, laughed along, fueling his contempt. But arrogance is a dangerous blindfold. Adrian didn't notice the way his empire was beginning to fray at the edges. He didn't see the exhaustion in his executives' faces, the quiet discontent among shareholders, the journalists piecing together his scandals. He was too busy parading Sabrina through the city, too busy soaking in the applause of strangers, too busy underestimating Elena. Because in Adrian's mind, Elena was gone forever. A forgotten chapter. A discarded woman too meek to ever rise again. What he could not imagine was that 5 years later, Elena's name would echo through the halls of the courthouse, not as a cautionary tale, but as the heir to a fortune greater than his own. And the day that judgment was read aloud, Adrian Cole, the man who thought he owned the world, would realize too late that he had created his own downfall. The storm that had started in Adrian's mansion spilled into the city within days. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers about Adrian's discarded wife, about Sabrina replacing her, about a scandal big enough to feed the tabloids for months. But the true breaking point, the one that seared Elena's pain into the public memory, came at a glittering event she never should have attended. It was Cole Global's annual product launch, a night that drew investors, reporters, and industry leaders from around the world. The venue was a grand hotel ballroom in Midtown Manhattan, its ceilings draped in silk, its chandeliers glowing like captured starlight. Cameras lined the red carpet, their flashes stinging like lightning as guests arrived in limousines and tuxedos. For years, Elena had been at Adrian's side for this event. She had walked those same carpets, shaking hands, smiling for photos, arranging last-minute details to make sure the launch was flawless. She had believed she was part of his success. But this year, she arrived alone. She hadn't planned on coming. After Adrian threw her out, she wanted nothing more than to disappear. But a part of her, a desperate, trembling part, still hoped that if she showed up, if she stood her ground, Adrian might remember who she was, that he might see her not as a liability, but as the woman who had believed in him before the world did. Elena wore the only evening gown she hadn't left behind, a navy silk dress, a little worn at the seams, but still elegant. She stepped out of a cab, clutching her small clutch bag as cameras swung toward her. The murmurs started instantly. "Isn't that Adrian Cole's wife?" "No, ex-wife, I think. Didn't he throw her out?" "And that's Sabrina now, isn't it? Look, there she is." Elena turned, her stomach dropping. Just steps away, Sabrina emerged from a sleek black limousine, her hand tucked neatly into Adrian's arm. She wore a diamond-studded gown that sparkled under the flashes, and her smile was the kind of smile meant to wound. Adrian leaned down to kiss her cheek in full view of the cameras, making their new alliance official. Elena froze, her breath caught in her throat. The cameras abandoned her, swinging fully toward the couple. She could hear reporters shouting Sabrina's name, asking Adrian about his new partner. It was as if Elena had vanished, as if she had never been part of his life. But humiliation didn't stop at the red carpet. Inside the ballroom, Elena tried to blend in. She kept her head high, even as whispers followed her through the crowd. She looks lost. Why would she even come here? Poor thing. She wanted to disappear, but leaving would feel like surrender. She told herself she could survive the night if she just stayed quiet, if she just avoided Adrian. But fate was not on her side. Halfway through the evening, as waiters cleared champagne glasses and the orchestra began a soft waltz, Adrian took the stage. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, broad shoulders, confident smile, Sabrina radiant at his side. The room applauded, cameras flashing as he welcomed investors and praised his team. Then his eyes landed on Elena. A cruel smirk tugged at his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth, carrying easily across the ballroom. "I want to thank the person who first believed in me. She's here tonight, though I'm not sure why. My former wife, Elena Torres." The spotlight swung to her. Gasps rippled through the room. Dozens of eyes turned, curious, pitying, some openly mocking. Elena felt her face burn. Her hands clenched around her clutch, her chest rising and falling as though she couldn't breathe. Adrian continued, his tone dripping with false kindness. "Elena supported me once upon a time, but life changes. People grow. Some can keep up, some can't." His gaze flicked deliberately to Sabrina, who beamed like a queen. "I'm grateful to have found someone who shares my vision for the future." Laughter, applause. The crowd swallowed his cruelty like fine wine. Elena wanted to vanish, to melt into the marble floor. Instead, she stood frozen, the humiliation slicing her open in front of everyone she once thought were peers. She could feel tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Suddenly, two men in dark suits approached. Security. One leaned close, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, Mr. Cole has requested that you leave. This is a private event." Her stomach dropped. "Leave?" she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Now." The crowd was watching, some whispering, others openly smiling at the spectacle. The once wife of the CEO, being escorted out like an uninvited guest. Elena's legs trembled as the guards flanked her, guiding her toward the doors. Her heels clicked against the marble, each step echoing like a final judgment. She caught glimpses of faces, some pitying, some gleeful, most indifferent. No one spoke up for her. No one stopped them. As she reached the exit, she made the mistake of looking back. Adrian was on stage, his arm draped around Sabrina, his smile wide and victorious. To him, this was not just about removing her from the event. It was about erasing her existence, showing the world that she no longer mattered. The doors slammed shut behind her, leaving her in the cold silence of the hotel corridor. The distant thrum of music and laughter seeped through the walls, mocking her. She stumbled forward, her breath shallow, her chest aching with humiliation so sharp it felt physical. She had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her place in the world, and now even her dignity had been stripped in front of hundreds of witnesses. Outside, the rain fell again, as though the city itself wept for her. Elena clutched her clutch bag, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, mixing with the rain. She walked aimlessly into the night, her heels sinking into puddles, her dress heavy with water. The paparazzi caught her again. Cameras flashed mercilessly as they captured her soaked, broken, walking alone under the storm. By morning, the photos would be plastered on every tabloid with headlines like, "Discarded wife humiliated at CEO's gala," and "From partner to nobody, Elena Torres's fall from grace." And yet, even in her darkest hour, something inside her refused to die. Because humiliation, as brutal as it was, has a way of planting seeds. Seeds of anger. Seeds of resolve. Seeds of transformation. And as Elena disappeared into the storm that night, the world believed she had been destroyed, never realizing that humiliation would one day become the fuel for her greatest revenge. The days after the gala blurred together into a haze of shame and exhaustion. Alina barely remembered how she made it back to the tiny sublet apartment she had scraped together with the last of her savings. She only knew that when the door closed behind her, she collapsed onto the floor and sobbed until her chest ached. The humiliation replayed endlessly in her mind. The spotlight on her, the laughter in the room, Adrian's mocking words, Sabrina's triumphant smile. The way security had escorted her out like a criminal. She couldn't open her phone without seeing her own face plastered across headlines. Ex-wife humiliated by CEO Cole. Or Sabrina Miller, crowned new queen of Wall Street. Strangers mocked her online. Comment sections filled with cruel words. She should have known better. What did she expect? A small-town girl can't keep up with billionaires. Pathetic. Alina stopped checking the news. She stopped leaving the apartment. The world outside was too loud, too cruel, too quick to erase her. Money dwindled fast. Adrian had cut her off completely. No alimony, no settlement, no home. The lawyer she had once hired told her bluntly that Adrian's prenup left her with nothing, and fighting him in court would only drain what little she had left. She pawned jewelry, sold her designer handbags, and stretched groceries into thin meals. Some nights, she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, her mind spiraling with doubts. Maybe Adrian had been right. Maybe she had been holding him back. Maybe she had never belonged in his world at all. She missed her mother's voice, but pride kept her from calling home. She didn't want to hear the pity in Rose's tone, didn't want to admit that the life she had built in New York had crumbled so spectacularly. She had promised her family she was destined for more, that she was finally escaping the cycle of struggle. Now, she was worse off than when she started. The loneliness was suffocating. Sabrina had stolen not only her husband, but her best friend. The few acquaintances Alina had made in Adrian's world vanished the moment she was no longer Mrs. Cole. Invitations stopped arriving, calls went unanswered, texts remained unread. She was radioactive, a social stain no one wanted to be near. Weeks turned into months. Alina worked odd jobs, waitressing, temp office work, even cleaning apartments, anything to cover rent. Each time she scrubbed a stranger's floor, she thought about the marble halls of the Cole mansion and wondered if it had all been a dream. Her body bore the weight of despair. Her once glossy hair grew dull, her face gaunt, her hands calloused. She avoided mirrors, unable to face the woman staring back. One evening, after a particularly grueling double shift at a diner, Alina trudged home through freezing rain. Her thin coat clung to her body, her shoes soaked through. When she finally reached her apartment, she collapsed onto the bed without undressing. Hours later, she woke with a fever. Alone, shivering, weak, she realized just how close to the edge she had come. No one was coming to rescue her. No husband, no friend, no glittering society. She had been discarded, forgotten. For the first time, Alina allowed herself to wonder if this was the end. If perhaps she was destined to fade quietly, remembered only as the woman a billionaire once threw out in the rain. But sometimes, when despair reaches its peak, fate intervenes. One night, as she sat in the dark staring at the flickering light of a dying lamp, there was a knock at the door. It startled her. No one ever visited. She hesitated, fear twisting in her stomach. Slowly, she opened the door. On the other side stood a man in his 60s, tall, distinguished with silver hair and kind but piercing eyes. He wore a long coat, raindrops glistening on the shoulders. "Elena Torres?" he asked, his voice deep, measured. She nodded, clutching the doorframe. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Richard Lawson," he said, handing her a business card. "Lawson and Flint, attorneys at law. I've been looking for you." Elena blinked, confused. "Looking for me? Why?" He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing whether she was ready for what he had to say. Finally, he spoke. "Because someone very important left something behind for you, and it's time you knew the truth." Elena's breath caught. For months she had lived in darkness, certain her story had ended. Now, in the doorway of her crumbling apartment, a stranger was offering a spark of light. She had no idea that this meeting would change everything, that the woman the world had written off was about to become the sole heir to $5 billion. For a long moment, Elena just stared at the man in her doorway. Rain drummed steadily against the hallway windows, the kind of relentless storm that mirrored the chaos inside her chest. Richard Lawson. The name meant nothing to her. The words he had spoken, "Someone important left something for you," Sounded like a cruel mistake. She swallowed hard. I think you must be looking for someone else. I don't know any important people. Richard's eyes softened, though his voice carried a certainty that unnerved her. No, Miss Torres. I assure you, I have the right person. Please, may I come in? We should talk somewhere private. Hesitant, embarrassed by the state of her tiny apartment, Elena stepped aside. Richard entered, his polished shoes squeaking faintly against the worn linoleum floor. He glanced around, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the single chair by the window, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. He said nothing, but Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Pity, perhaps, or maybe respect that she had endured so much. She offered him the chair and sat on the edge of her bed. Silence stretched, broken only by the sound of distant thunder. Finally, she asked, "What is this about?" Richard placed his leather briefcase on his lap and clicked it open. From inside, he pulled out a thick folder embossed with a gold seal. He held it carefully, like something fragile. Miss Torres, do you recall the name Charles Lawson? Elena shook her head. No. Should I? He was my older brother, Richard explained. A man who, for decades, built a vast fortune in real estate, energy, and technology. He was one of the most private billionaires in America. Rarely in the press, rarely seen outside of boardrooms. 5 months ago, he passed away. Elena frowned, confused. I'm sorry for your loss, but what does that have to do with me? Richard leaned forward, his voice steady. Everything, because in his final will and testament, Charles named you, Elena Torres, as the sole heir to his estate. That estate, Miss Torres, is valued at $5 billion. The words slammed into her like a physical blow. For a second, she thought she had misheard. She laughed, but the sound was brittle. That's impossible. I don't even know him. Why would a billionaire leave me anything, let alone that? Richard opened the folder and slid a document across to her. The legal pages swam before her eyes, heavy with signatures and stamps, and there in crisp black ink was her name, Elena Maria Torres, sole beneficiary. Her hands shook as she clutched the paper. This has to be a mistake. It isn't, Richard replied calmly. I was Charles's attorney and confidant for more than 30 years. He was a shrewd man, but also a man of intuition. Years ago, he attended one of Cole Global's charity events. You wouldn't have noticed him. He preferred to stay in the background. But he noticed you. He saw how you carried yourself, how you spoke with humility, how you treated people others ignored. He told me, that young woman has integrity. Real integrity. One day she'll need it. Elena's eyes filled with tears. The idea that a stranger, someone she couldn't even recall, had seen her, had valued her, while her own husband had discarded her, was overwhelming. Richard continued, his tone grave. Charles knew the world of power and wealth is corrupting. He distrusted many around him, but he believed in you. He instructed that if anything happened to him, his fortune would go to you. Not to me, not to distant relatives, but to you. Because he wanted it in the hands of someone who would not abuse it. Elena shook her head, clutching the document to her chest. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I deserve this. Richard's gaze was firm. Deserve has nothing to do with it. You've already endured the kind of betrayal and humiliation that would break most people. But Charles believed suffering shapes character. He trusted you to carry this legacy. And I, Miss Torres, will help you protect it. The room spun. Just days ago, she had been struggling to pay rent, wondering if she had any future at all. Now a man was telling her she was one of the wealthiest women in the country. The contrast was dizzying, almost cruel in its irony. She whispered, if Adrian finds out. Richard's jaw tightened. He will. Men like him always find out. But understand this, he cannot touch a cent of it. The estate is ironclad, and when the court finalizes the transfer in a few weeks, the entire world will know your name, not as the discarded wife of Adrian Cole, but as the heiress to $5 billion. The thought terrified her. Cameras, headlines, attention she had once dreaded. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred. A spark she hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the cruel kind Adrian wielded, but the kind that came from having choices again. Richard rose, closing his briefcase. I will return in 3 days with further instructions. Until then, keep this confidential. The less Adrian knows, the better. Trust me, Miss Torres. This is only the beginning. When the door closed behind him, Elena sat frozen. The papers trembled in her hands. Her entire life had been rewritten in a single conversation, from humiliated ex-wife to billionaire heiress. But even as the hope bloomed inside her, so did fear. She knew Adrian, she knew Sabrina, and once they discovered the truth, they would not stand idle. Because wealth this great was not just a gift, it was a weapon. And soon, Elena Torres would learn that inheriting $5 billion meant stepping back into the same ruthless world that had once destroyed her. For weeks after Richard's visit, Elena lived in a haze of disbelief. Each time she looked at the documents, her breath caught. $5 billion. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like hers. She had grown used to scarcity, to watching every penny, to shrinking so small the world could forget she existed. Wealth of that magnitude was impossible to comprehend. But soon, reality set in. The court proceedings began. Newspapers leaked whispers of an unexpected heiress about to inherit a legendary fortune. Though her name hadn't been revealed yet, Elena knew it was only a matter of time before the world discovered the truth. Richard insisted she prepare. Money this powerful, he said, is like a storm. If you don't take control of it, it will control you. You must step into this new role with confidence, Elena. Not as the broken woman they mocked, but as the woman who will command respect. At first, she resisted. The thought of walking into a boardroom, of facing cameras, of standing where Adrian once stood. It filled her with dread. But Richard was patient. He introduced her to stylists, mentors, advisors. He reminded her that wealth was more than numbers in a bank account. It was armor. And Elena, for the first time, began to put that armor on. The transformation started small. A haircut. Gone was the long, neglected hair that had hung lifeless around her face. In its place, a sleek, shoulder-length style that framed her features with strength. Then came clothing. No longer the thrift store dresses or hand-me-down coats. Tailored suits in navy and ivory, gowns that shimmered without screaming for attention, heels that carried her with authority. The first time she saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This woman did not look like the ex-wife who had been thrown out into the rain. She looked like someone untouchable. But transformation wasn't only on the outside. Richard arranged for her to meet a speaking coach, a former senator who taught her how to hold a room with silence as much as with words. She learned to pause, to control her tone, to project not desperation, but certainty. She devoured books on finance, leadership, and negotiation, determined never again to be the woman dismissed at boardroom tables. At night, she wrote in a journal, pouring out her pain and reshaping it into resolve. "I am not invisible," she wrote. "I am not weak. I am not theirs to destroy." Each sentence became a brick in the new foundation she was building. The transformation became undeniable the day she walked into the Lawson Estate headquarters for the first time. The building was a towering glass structure on Park Avenue, once belonging to Charles Lawson, now hers by legal decree. Staff members lined the lobby, their eyes curious, skeptical. Many had expected an older relative to inherit, or perhaps a seasoned executive. Instead, they saw Elena Torres, a woman whispered about in gossip columns as Adrian Cole's discarded wife. But Elena did not flinch. Dressed in a tailored cream suit, her heels clicking like punctuation against marble floors, she walked straight through the lobby with Richard at her side. She greeted the employees warmly, her smile calm but unyielding. And in that moment, she understood. Perception was power. If she carried herself like she belonged, the world would eventually believe it. The press caught their first glimpse of her that afternoon. Cameras swarmed as she exited the building. Headlines erupted. Mystery heiress revealed. Adrian Cole's ex-wife inherits fortune. And from humiliation to heiress, Elena Torres' stunning return. Adrian and Sabrina saw the headlines too. In their penthouse, Sabrina threw a glass against the wall, shards scattering across marble floors. "This has to be a joke," she spat. "Her? The one you threw away? She's nothing." But Adrian said nothing. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing at the photograph of Elena on the front page. Elegant, poised, untouchable. For the first time in years, a flicker of unease crept into his chest. Meanwhile, Elena continued her rebirth. She opened charitable foundations in her late mother's name, supporting women who had been discarded by powerful men. She rebuilt her relationship with her family, flying her mother to New York and vowing never again to hide her shame. She became a symbol, Not just an heiress, but a woman who had risen from ashes the world thought permanent. And yet, beneath the triumph, she knew the battle was not over. Adrian would not stay silent. He was a man who thrived on control, and nothing threatened him more than the woman he had once erased rising higher than him. The final step of her transformation came one night as she stood before a mirror, preparing for her first televised interview. The studio lights glowed behind her, makeup artists flitted about, but Elena focused only on her reflection. She no longer saw the broken wife drenched in rain. She saw steel. She saw fire. She saw a woman who had survived humiliation, poverty, despair, and had turned it into something unshakable. The producer called her name. Elena straightened her shoulders, smoothed her suit, and walked onto the stage. Applause filled the studio, cameras zoomed in, and the world leaned forward to listen. Her transformation was complete. But the war was only beginning. Because as Elena claimed her new identity before millions, Adrian Cole was already plotting his return, determined to prove that no woman, not even the one he threw away, could stand against him. The courthouse was packed. Reporters jostled for position on the steps. Microphones stretched out like weapons, cameras flashing so furiously it looked like a storm of lightning. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. It wasn't just another legal proceeding, it was a spectacle, the kind of case that defined reputations and rewrote destinies. At the center of it all stood Elena Torres. She walked through the courthouse doors with Richard Lawson at her side, her cream-colored suit impeccable, her chin held high. She looked untouchable, every step measured, her heels echoing across the marble floors like thunderclaps. The world that once mocked her now watched with awe. Behind her came Adrian Cole and Sabrina Miller. Adrian's jaw was set in stone, his eyes burning with fury barely hidden behind a polished smile. Sabrina clung to his arm, dressed in a scarlet dress that screamed defiance, but her eyes betrayed flickers of panic. The case was simple on paper, the validity of Charles Lawson's will, which named Elena as the sole heir to his $5 billion fortune. But beneath the legal jargon lay the real battle, Adrian and Sabrina fighting not just for money, but for pride, power, and survival. The courtroom was a theater. The judge, stern and composed, sat at the bench. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispered strategies, and eyed the press gallery. Rows of spectators leaned forward in their seats, waiting for fireworks. Adrian's attorney was the first to speak. A sleek man in a tailored gray suit, he painted Elena as unfit, unworthy, a nobody who had stumbled into fortune by mistake. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "this woman was discarded by my client because she could not keep up with the demands of his world. Are we really to believe she is capable of managing $5 billion? This inheritance is not just misguided, it is dangerous." Murmurs rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on Elena's face, searching for cracks. But she remained still, her eyes fixed on the attorney, her expression calm, unreadable. Then it was Richard's turn. He rose slowly, his voice measured, deliberate. "Your Honor, what my colleague neglects to mention is that integrity cannot be bought. Charles Lawson chose Miss Torres not because of her wealth or status, but because of her character. He saw in her what so many others overlooked: strength, humility, and honesty. The very qualities that make her uniquely capable of stewarding his legacy." The judge nodded slightly, considering. Adrian shifted in his seat, frustration evident. For years he had been the man who controlled every room, every narrative. But here, for the first time, he felt the ground slipping. The proceedings dragged on for hours. Witnesses testified to Charles Lawson's intentions. Documents were examined, signatures verified, legal arguments dissected. Through it all, Elena sat poised, speaking only when asked, her voice steady, her answers precise. She no longer resembled the broken woman thrown out into the rain. She was composed, formidable, unshakable. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Richard produced a letter, handwritten, sealed, authenticated, by Charles Lawson himself. He read aloud, "To Elena Torres, I leave my fortune not out of charity, but out of faith. I have seen many powerful men destroy themselves with greed. I believe you will not. Protect this legacy, and never let the world convince you that you are less than what you are." Gasps filled the courtroom. The words rang like a final verdict, louder than any lawyer's argument. Adrian's face flushed red, his hands tightening into fists. Sabrina shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting nervously toward the cameras. The judge leaned back, her gaze sharp. "I have heard enough," she said. "The intent of Charles Lawson is clear. This court recognizes Elena Torres as the sole heir to his estate." The gavel struck. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Chaos erupted. Reporters rushed toward the doors to broadcast the news. Spectators whispered and gasped. Cameras zoomed in on Elena, capturing her composed smile, her eyes glistening with quiet triumph. But the most striking image was not Elena's victory. It was Adrian and Sabrina's downfall. Adrian shot to his feet, shouting at the judge, his voice cracking with rage. "This is a farce. She's nothing without me. She doesn't deserve a cent of it." Security moved in, guiding him back, but the cameras had already captured it. The once untouchable CEO unraveling in public. Sabrina, sensing the shift, tried to salvage dignity. She smiled at the cameras, clinging tighter to Adrian's arm, but her face betrayed fear. The whispers around the courtroom weren't about her beauty anymore. They were about her betrayal, her fall from grace. Elena rose gracefully, gathering her documents. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The sight of Adrian raging and Sabrina trembling was victory enough. As she walked past them, she paused just long enough to meet Adrian's eyes. "Do you remember the night you gave me 24 hours? She said softly, her voice low but steady. "Consider this my 24 hours for you. Everything you thought was yours is gone." Adrian's face contorted with fury, but Elena turned away, her steps calm, her back straight. The cameras followed her, flashes exploding, her image immortalized not as a victim, but as the woman who had taken back her power. Outside, the courthouse steps became her stage. Microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting her name, asking how it felt to inherit $5 billion. Elena paused, the city lights glinting off her hair, her voice clear and resolute. "I didn't win this fortune," she said. "I survived to earn it, and I will use it to build, not destroy. That is the difference between me and those who tried to break me." The crowd erupted in applause. Headlines were already writing themselves. Elena Torres, from humiliation to heiress. But behind the applause, danger brewed. Because Adrian Cole was not a man who accepted defeat. And as Elena claimed her victory on the courthouse steps, he was already plotting a revenge that could risk everything she had just won. The world did not forget the scene at the courthouse. By the next morning, Elena Torres's name was on every front page, every broadcast, every trending headline. Heiress triumphs over CEO ex-husband. From humiliation to power, Elena Torres's stunning rise. Images of her leaving the courthouse, poised, resolute, untouchable, circulated around the globe. But while the world celebrated her, Adrian Cole unraveled. In the weeks following the verdict, Adrian's empire collapsed under the weight of scandal. Investors pulled out, wary of his public meltdown. Shareholders demanded his resignation. Whispers of misconduct and reckless spending surfaced, amplified by the press that once praised him. His once flawless image shattered beyond repair. Sabrina fared no better. Once hailed as the glamorous mistress-turned-partner, she became a cautionary tale. The magazines that had photographed her gowns now mocked her desperation. The Scarlet Betrayer, they called her. Invitations to galas dried up. Her social circle shrank. Behind closed doors, arguments with Adrian grew vicious, their alliance fraying under pressure. Elena, however, rose higher. She moved into the Lawson estate, not as a trophy heiress, but as a woman with purpose. She reorganized the foundation Charles Lawson had left behind, pouring resources into education programs, women's shelters, and scholarships for girls from small towns like hers. She created opportunities for women abandoned by powerful men, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. Her speeches began to draw crowds. She spoke not in polished corporate jargon, but in words that carried the raw weight of her journey. "I was told I was nothing," she said at a women's conference. "I was humiliated, betrayed, discarded. But humiliation is not the end. It can be the beginning. You are not invisible. You are not weak. You are more than what they tried to take from you." The applause was thunderous, her message echoing in the hearts of women who had suffered in silence. Elena had become more than an heiress. She had become a symbol. But Adrian was not finished. One evening, as Elena prepared for a gala celebrating the launch of her new initiative, her phone buzzed with a message, a single line. "This isn't over. Adrian." She stared at the words, her hands steady. Months ago, that message would have sent her spiraling into fear. Now, it only confirmed what she already knew. Adrian was incapable of accepting defeat. At the gala that night, held in the same metropolitan ballroom where she had once been humiliated, Adrian made his move. He arrived uninvited, dragging Sabrina in tow. Cameras swarmed, eager for a confrontation. Adrian stormed toward Alina, his voice booming over the crowd. "You think this is victory? You stole what was mine. You don't deserve a cent of it." The room froze. Guests gasped. Cameras turned, capturing every second. But Alina didn't flinch. She set down her champagne glass, lifted her chin, and faced him. "This was never yours, Adrian," she said, her voice calm, carrying through the hall. "You built an empire on arrogance and betrayal, and when it crumbled, you blamed everyone but yourself. You didn't lose to me. You lost to your own greed." The words struck harder than any gavel. Applause erupted, drowning out Adrian's sputtered fury. He tried to shout again, but security stepped in, escorting him and Sabrina out as cameras captured the moment. It was the final image the world needed. Adrian Cole, once the untouchable CEO, dragged away in disgrace. Elena stood at the center of the ballroom, the same place she had once stood in humiliation, now surrounded by applause. She took a deep breath, her heart steady, her spirit unshakable. Later that night, in an interview broadcast worldwide, a reporter asked her, "What would you say to the women watching you tonight? Women who feel powerless, invisible, broken." Elena looked directly into the camera. Her eyes glistened, her voice steady, carrying the weight of every tear, every wound, every moment she had survived. "I would tell them this," she said. "You are not defined by the man who betrayed you or the world that mocked you. You are defined by your strength to stand again, even when the world expects you to fall. Don't beg to be chosen, choose yourself. And when they try to throw you away, remember, trash does not turn into treasure." But women? Women rise, women endure, women win. The studio fell silent, then erupted in applause. The words spread across headlines, across social media, across the world. Elena Torres, once the forgotten wife left crying in the rain, had become the voice of a movement. Adrian Cole disappeared into obscurity, his name now a warning rather than a title. Sabrina faded with him, her beauty no longer enough to buy her relevance. But Alina soared, her legacy secured not by the billions she inherited, but by the billions she inspired. She had been humiliated, discarded, betrayed, but she had transformed every wound into strength, every loss into power, every humiliation into triumph. And on that night, as she stood on stage, applause thundering around her, Elena Torres smiled through tears, not of sorrow, but of catharsis. Because in the end, she had won not just money, not just revenge, but freedom. And with freedom came the power to inspire the world. So that's it. Our story has come to an end. And if you, my wonderful friends, are still here with me right now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a way words can't fully explain. Maybe it reminded you of your own battles, maybe of a wound you've carried, or maybe it sparked a quiet strength you'd forgotten you had. Elena's story isn't just about betrayal, wealth, or revenge. It's about resilience. It's about how a person can be pushed into the darkest night, humiliated and abandoned, yet still rise again stronger than ever. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's exactly what Elena showed us. What looked like the end of her life became the very path to her transformation. And Seneca reminded us, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. How many times did Elena think she was finished? How many times do we think the same about our own lives? But pain, humiliation, even loss, none of these define us unless we let them. What defines us is how we respond, how we stand back up, how we keep walking when the world expects us to fall. So maybe tonight, you take this story not as distant drama, but as a mirror. Whatever storm you are facing, remember, you are not alone, and you are not powerless. You are far stronger than you realize. If this story moved you, if it lit even the smallest fire in your heart, then please, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we're not just watching stories, we're healing, we're growing, and we're proving that no matter what, we can rise.